Hello and welcome to BFCA. In the last video, you saw how there can only be an employment contract where all the three factors exist: personal service, control, and mutuality of obligation. In this video, you'll hear about control. In the ready-mixed concrete case, Judge McKenna said, "An obligation to do work subject to the other party's control is a necessary condition of a contract of service." Therefore, in a contractual arrangement where the client does not have control over the worker, the contract will be outside IR35. Control is about what, where, when and how, according to HMRC's manuals, and is also defined by Judge McKenna in the ready-mixed concrete case as: control includes the power of deciding the thing to be done, the way in which it shall be done, the means to be employed in doing it, the time when, and the place where it shall be done. All these aspects of control must be considered in deciding whether the right exists in a sufficient degree to make one party the master and the other his servant. The right need not be unrestricted. What? If a worker can be told what to do in a succession of requests, then there's control. If, however, the worker is taken on as a specialist to do a specific type of task and does that task only, then there may not be control over what the worker does as such. Where? If the worker can be told where to do the work, then that's an indicator of control. Unless the nature of the work means it has to be done at a certain location. HMRC suggests at ESM 0522 that if the nature of the work means that where it can be done is restricted, then this will not be a factor to use to determine if there's control or not. For example, a contractor working on a company's banking system could not practically do that work at home because of the security risk to the company's data. When? If the client can determine what hours the worker must be present, HMRC considered this a pointer towards having control over an employee. But HMRC also recommend caution when doing so at ESM 524 and recommend their staff look at the full picture, because this factor on its own will not remove the control. However, if work has to be done on site and the premises is only open for office hours, then the worker can only carry out the work during office hours. This is not control, it's the practical application of a contract. And both employees and non-employed contractors will be asked to work to deadlines. The when factor means the end client has the right to determine the worker's hours of work. How? HMRC define the how as the ability of the end client to determine the manner in which the worker completes the work. Do they have to follow given processes, or can the worker choose how their work's done? But HMRC also explain in ESM 0526 that where this control over how the work's completed does not exist, this is likely to be at best a mild pointer to self-employment, because many employees have specialist skills and knowledge and would not expect to be closely supervised. The case law in regard to control still focuses on the fact that for there to be control, then there must be sufficient control whereby one person is in the position of being a servant to a master. Without this level of control, there can be no contract of service, and therefore the contract would not be caught by IR35. Both Castle Construction (Chesterfield) Limited versus Revenue and Customs 2008 and Mark Andrew Lewis trading as MAL Scaffolding versus Revenue and Customs 2006 are useful cases on control. In the Castle case, Special Commissioner Howard Nolan decided that on the perhaps more critical question of whether the appellant or indeed the principal contractors told the bricklayers how to lay bricks, it was never suggested that they did. Since many of the workers were, I understand, highly skilled and experienced, I imagine that they needed no control in this regard and would most certainly not have welcomed it. Rather, as Special Commissioner Mr. Williams concluded in MAL Scaffolding versus HMRC SPC 527 in 2006, the bricklayers were probably as fiercely independent as the scaffolders were in the MAL Scaffolding case, and would probably have been reluctant to accept control from anyone as to how they actually did their job. Beyond the fact, therefore, that the principal contractors ensured that the architect's plans were followed, and rather obviously that walls were not put in the wrong place or built in the wrong sequence, there seems to have been little relevant exercise of control that can have much influence on my decision. If you're relying on the lack of control in your contractual clauses and your position as a specialist, make sure that your practical day-to-day working arrangements support this contention and do not represent a master-servant relationship. For example, you can say no if your client asks you to do something in a manner which compromises the nature of the contract or your working arrangements. Wherever possible, always keep documentation and evidence of where control is not exercised by your client. For further clarity, you may wish to have your understanding of the practical arrangements in place in relation to control confirmed by your client in a letter. That's the end of this video. We've looked at the second factor in the irreducible minimum of 3, control. In the next video, we'll look at the third and final factor, which is mutuality of obligation. Thanks for listening.